Hello, colleagues, and welcome to Trust Leaders in the Loop, the sixth monthly podcast from Forum Strategy. And I'm Frank Norris, the former CEO of the Co-op Academies Trust, and I've been asked to host these monthly education chats for Forum Strategy members. And as usual, today I'm joined by Sarah Gins, Forum Strategy's Research Manager. Hello, Sarah, how are you?
I'm all right, thanks, Frank. How are you?
I'm well. I feel very upbeat today. I don't know why, but I do feel that way. I tell you what, it may be because we've actually got a guest joining us today. So it's not the Frank and Sarah show. I'm delighted to say, well, not just our show, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Maggie Farrar. Hello, Maggie.
Hello, Frank. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Maggie. Lovely to see you.
Too.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. You're our first guest. I mean, and if this goes well, we may actually have another guest. But let's see how we go. Let's not run ahead of ourselves. Maggie, there may be a few people out there who don't know who you are. So would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. And look, it's such a great delight to be here in this conversation. I know how useful these podcasts are and how important the work of Forum Strategy is. So I've had the great privilege of working in education all my life, in school leadership. I was at the National College for a number of years. That's where Sarah and I first met, and I met Michael Payne. Since I left the college, I've been working on leadership development, particularly a lot of work around collaborative approaches to school improvement, peer review. And the last 3 or 4 years, my work has focused on what I think is quite a big imbalance in leadership development work, which is I've been working with leaders on their inner world, the inner life of leaders.
Oh, wow.
And how the cultivation of our inner world, how it intersects with the outer world and shows up in how we lead. And of course, over the last 2 years with the pandemic, that's become incredibly important, with leaders being racked with self-doubt and feeling the ground was pulled out from under their feet, needing to reconnect with core purpose and so on. So that's work, honestly, that I absolutely love. I absolutely love it. And I feel really fortunate that it's work that I can continue to do and seems to really resonate with leaders. And I think when we talk today, we may get into some of this around how we accomplish extraordinarily ambitious things for the benefit of others, and how our inner world is so much a part of that. So
wow, I've not heard that phrase, inner world, but actually it's very thought-provoking, isn't it, about how you feel within yourself, and actually it made me think, Maggie, as you were talking about leaders having time for their inner self in order to sort of understand themselves, so that actually they can begin to start looking at what the future might look like, because obviously that's going to affect their inner self, and the inner self may prevent some of that freer thinking because it may be seen to be a bit challenging. I mean, do you feel at the moment as if head teachers, school leaders, trust leaders are they in a position whereby they are starting to begin to venture out into thinking about, well, perhaps we don't really want to go back to where we were before? How's it feeling? How are you hearing? What are you hearing about that?
I am hearing that school leaders, trust leaders are. Tim Brighouse talks about we're living at a hinge of history. We are. Where what went before we realised was always broken, actually. But the pandemic really exacerbated that hugely. And I think in a strange way, school leaders and trust leaders, because they had to lean on each other much more, found a new sense of solidarity and a new sense of common purpose around what really matters to me as a human, to us as professionals. And I think that, coupled with things like, and I don't want to get too big here, but I think it's relevant, impending climate change, instability in Europe, there's a sense of urgency that the world is fragmenting so much. It's opened up that going back, I mean, in Alice in Wonderland, in a conversation with the Mock Turtle, she says to the Mock Turtle, how can I go back to yesterday? I was a different person then. And I think many of us coming to this point in the pandemic do feel like that. So I think for trust leaders, I feel as if head teachers and trust leaders are like highly bred racehorses that have been in the stable and they're just kicking at the door. And I think they're ready. I think there's a reticence in terms of, but all my staff want to do and want to have is some stability. You know, oh no, not more change. Can we just get some stability for a while? The world is never stable, let's be honest. So I do think that trust leaders are ready and want to, but I think if the cautiousness comes from anywhere, it's how much more change can my staff really cope with at this time when our physical, mental, emotional resources are very depleted. So that for me, I think is a dilemma.
Interesting. It's probably quite a good link in here, isn't it? Because I think the reason why I think it was helpful to invite you to join us as a guest this month is because there's a symposium that I think you're chairing, which Forum Strategy you're organising. What's the date of this, Sarah? I should have it on the tip of my tongue.
It's the 8th of June. 8th of June.
And just plugging it a bit, I mean, before we get onto it, I mean, where is it being held and who's the guest who's going to be leading it?
It's going to be at Trent Vineyard. So anybody who came to last year's face-to-face annual conference, Forum annual conference, it's the same venue in the centre of Nottingham. It's a great venue. So we're going back there. We're delighted. We're also delighted that we've got almost 150 people signed up for it now, which is great. So we're really, really looking forward to it and to working together on that. So I'd like to sort of hand over now to Maggie to give us more of a flavour.
Yes. So Maggie, what's the theme? How's this all going to work?
Well, you know, the person who's coming along to, in a sense, guide us in this is Michael Barber. So, you know, this is really exciting, if not very daunting. Very daunting. I mean, you know, if ever there was the sort of sense of do it and do it scared, I think, Sarah, that's where we are with this symposium, because its potential is significant. So Michael's written, and if people don't know it, I have it here, a really great book called Accomplishment: How to Achieve Ambitious and Challenging Things. And it really distills Michael's knowledge of working with governments around the world, organisations, business organisations, arts organisations, sports. You know, Gary Lineker, you know, Michael's a great lover of all sorts of sports, and so Gary Lineker's in there and others, and working with people who have, in lots of different ways, and they are all very different, learned to accomplish things that they never, ever thought possible. So that's really the invitation to trust leaders. What is it in your deepest heart and soul that you really wish you could accomplish? So, you know, when you leave the world of work, if we ever do, when you retire, you don't retire thinking, if only I'd tried that, if only I'd had a go at that, what might we have done that we didn't really manage to achieve? So Michael's going to be guiding us through the day with a whole range of stories from the book. So stories really feature as part of both the day and the process whereby you accomplish amazingly ambitious things. A storyteller inside us is really important. But he's also going to, and you wouldn't expect any less from Michael, to look at how we navigate challenges, develop the mindset around relishing critics, about understanding setbacks, about the discipline and focus and the determination needed to keep going in the face of what will inevitably be setbacks, and learn to thrive and flourish and love it. So that's basically the sort of invitation to the chief execs and others in their trust.
Fabulous. Well, it's sort of as if there's a it is a script for this here, Sarah, because actually we've had the government make an announcement over the last month in terms of its education white paper about where it sees the vision, where it sees the future. And bearing in mind, Maggie was going to be joining us today, I thought it'd be useful just to have a little knockabout with regard to our thoughts on the white paper. So I know you've done quite a lot of the chatting here, Maggie, but I feel as I should go to you first again, if you don't mind, Sarah.
Absolutely, yes.
Maggie, I mean, what was your take on it?
Well, it was interesting, Frank, giving me the opportunity to look at the white paper and the SEND review, being in the middle of the planning of the symposium, which we've just talked about. And I sort of went into the thinking about the white paper and the SEND review because, I'm 66, I've seen a lot of white papers come and go. And I'm always aware of bringing but in our day, and I remember every time matters and extended schools. And I had to stop myself doing all of that.
Maggie, I'm your age as well. And I can still remember the Bullock report and things like this as if they were going to change the world, but they didn't.
Oh, so there is a reflection there, isn't there, Frank? I don't know if we'll get into it, that we sort of think, oh, here we go again, but actually it's always different. And how do we cultivate seeing this white paper through new eyes and not through eyes of the past? Although we need to learn from the past, the world is different. So, I'm still thinking about that. So I think, for you and I of a certain age, it's an interesting thing to reflect on. But just to go back to the symposium for a minute, one of the things that Michael and I are going to try to cultivate is a mindset which we call beginner mindset, which is, if you come along to the event with a goal in mind, that you've got a pretty good idea of how to achieve it, and you feel your confidence is relatively high, think again. Because I said to Michael, what do you do in these complex times when you don't know what to do? And Michael said, you keep asking questions and you just begin. You're never ready if it's big enough, but you just keep asking questions and you probe and you scrutinize and you keep asking what else might be true here. And importantly, you challenge your own assumptions. And you challenge the assumptions of others. And that will not make you very popular, but that's what you do. And so if we think about that in relation to the white paper, the white paper, you asked me to think about what's good about it. And I just thought, well, what's good about it is it's underwhelming and dull.
Yeah, in a way, it's not revolutionary, is it?
No.
And actually, I was disappointed. Well, in some respects, I was pleased, but also disappointed with regard to the simplicity of some of the potential outcomes that are going to be, they're hoping to achieve in 10 years' time, in that they were so narrow, whether it was just around mathematics or whether it was just around literacy or whatever it may be. But actually, I think it sort of missed its place, I think, in terms of, I think senior leaders are very much aware of a broader range of outcomes unnecessary, whether that's because of a mental health crisis or whatever it may, or even simply just getting young people fully engaged with school again. That it felt as though it was still a little bit misplaced in terms of its narrowness. And that in a way was quite good as well as disappointing, because it wasn't setting out a massively wide agenda, which actually meant that perhaps there was quite a lot of space there for us to work with.
I think you're absolutely right, Frank. And do you think that very narrow, myopic focus, we might say, that very narrow focus, was a deliberately agreed approach because the system can't take any more at the moment, or whether it is just a very narrow-minded set of thinkers on it? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think it is a very narrow mindset. And I have to say, I was very fortunate in November to host the entire ministerial team in Blackpool with the non-execs and the senior civil servants. And I think one of the things for me was that it was we conveyed, I think, in a very sort of telling way, which was referenced last week when the Secretary of State was at the Education Committee, where he referenced the visit to Blackpool, which he obviously really enjoyed and we thought was very positive. But it was all the bits that were so positive about it, the things that I think we will all remember, will be the things that will way beyond just that narrowness of the targets, And even now I'm thinking of, I don't mind, if you don't mind me mentioning a particular academy, but the Star Academy have a single academy in Blackpool called Highfield. And there, some of the ministerial team had the opportunity to spend an hour, 2 hours with the young people. It wasn't a scripted event in that sort, and it was overwhelmingly brilliant about what those young people were telling the ministers about what was important for them to move forward. And what was so sad was that the white paper didn't really capture any of that. So last week we had the praise from the Secretary of State. But actually, that was great. But it didn't really, the white paper doesn't capture the thoughts of those young people sufficiently for me.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And that's what's missing from it. And actually, that was why I felt the SEND review felt much more studied and much more thoughtful, because it had clearly taken the views of parents and children and young people, adolescents, over a period of time, a longer period of time, into account. So that, for me, there was a sense of a different tone to it.
I think it's helpful that it's a green paper. I mean, in a way, it feels as though not everything has been sort of joined up, that there's still much debate to be had. And I think that's probably where it would have been nice. It's probably been difficult for the white paper because of the pandemic and everything to actually get that point of engagement.
Yeah.
But actually, I think that there was this sense that the difference between the two documents was one where you felt as though it was welcoming comment, welcoming, wanting to improve it, whereas the white paper felt as though it was landing on the table as, there was some stone there, and that some of these bits are not going to change no matter what you think of it, So I think that it in a way that you're right, the green paper, and particularly just trying to bring SEND processes into the 21st century by engaging sort of digital solutions to some of these problems. I think that's really really helpful. So I think there is some optimism around the green paper, and probably the sense that we can still chip away at it is probably quite helpful, I think, in terms of taking the messaging forward. What do you think, Sarah?
Yes, I thought the same. I thought that one of the things that I liked about the white paper, I obviously liked the plan to set out a sort of clear role for trusts and local authorities, although the risk that local authorities could set up trusts might muddy the water a little bit. So I think that needs some careful sort of picking apart, really. I particularly liked, or I'll be interested to see what the review that's due to launch next month, looking at accountability and regulation of trusts, will come up with. I think that some of the commentary around what a strong local identity is one of the sort of definitions of a strong trust, speaks to Forum's previous work on pure accountability to the local area. I think that was good. That was a positive. And one of the other things I really liked about it, actually, talking about the sort of bringing the systems into the 21st century, was this register for children not in school. That's finally made it in there, that's been talked about for some considerable time now. And actually the Education Committee themselves, House of Commons Education Committee themselves, every time they see a minister, they talk about this. So I think that's been a real positive. Let's hope that does come to fruition, because I think, that's really important. Children can't learn if they're not in school. And they can't achieve if they're not in school. So I think for me it's quite specific, but that was a real positive for me, looking at the details. And I think in terms of the SEND review, what I really liked was the bit about a more of a focus and learning from and putting more money into alternative provision. And seeing that as a core element of the SEND green paper and the thinking around that and sort of drawing on the expertise within that sector, which we know is incredibly strong, but hasn't always been seen as a core element of the education system. And I know we've got some alternative provision trusts as our members, so I'm really hoping that that's seen as a positive for them, and that they'll get an opportunity to get more involved, because it is a green paper, so it's a consultation exercise. So I'm hoping that they'll get an opportunity to have their views sort of seen and heard through that process. So I thought that was a really good positive from the Send Green paper.
Yeah.
Go, Maggie.
Well, I was going to ask Sarah a question, if that's all right.
Please, yeah.
Around that.
Well, let's put Sarah on the spot.
Well, just in terms of the member, the forum strategy members, and you mentioned some trusts that are focused on alternative provision. I was interested in the sort of role of trusts going forward. And the single regulatory framework, and what that might do in terms of the freedom, autonomy that trusts might have or not. And I know Michael's been writing about that recently. And I was also interested in picking up in the Send review, somewhere they use the phrase a family of schools.
Yes.
That notion of, it almost felt as if we were, again, I don't want to harp back to the old days, but that sense of the team around the child, every child, multi-agency approaches were coming through again. It's great to see. And I was just interested in terms of your point about locality, accountability, and how you see the trusts that you're engaging with within their local community, perhaps with other schools that are not part of the trust, the team around the child, and how the family of schools model, which has been named but not exactly explored, and the notion of trusts as families of schools, but not quite the same as a family of schools. What are your thoughts on that?
Gosh, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, who knows what's actually meant by that? But I think that, I think we had our annual conference in 2019 in September, obviously 6 months before the pandemic hit, and that was that core focus was on pure accountability, so accountability of trust to the local areas. And that couldn't have been demonstrated more strongly during the pandemic, to be fair. I mean, if there was ever an exemplar of what it actually meant, and, to kind of look at everything, and this is, again, going back to sort of, is the white paper trying to measure only what's easy to measure? Are those simple, KPIs, as it were, in there just because they're the easiest things to measure, but the range of things that trusts and schools did for the children in their local communities, from, hand delivering food parcels to families that they knew would struggle without free school meals, etc. Such a range of different things. And I think that, we've had examples of, many examples of trusts who've shown how, it's important. The head teachers have shown how important it is that they were part of a trust when it came to sharing resources and sharing venues, etc. But also that a lot of trusts, so many trusts, went beyond the boundaries of the trust and said, schools opened their arms almost to schools in their local areas and said, how can we help? You're not part of our trust, but it doesn't matter. What can we do to support you? And I really think that kind of accelerated that kind of change we were talking about in 2019. How you put those measurements into some sort of formal accountability is intriguing, be interesting. But I do think that it's really, I'm hoping that will accelerate the change, but I'm hoping that this discussion about local accountability doesn't again become some sort of narrow measurement. And my worry is that in terms of them talking about offset inspections, etc., they're going to look at, how trusts are collaborating and actually try and have that as a measurement quite sure how you measure that. So that's a real fear that we're going to try and narrow things down to the denominator that means we could, in the easiest way of measuring it, if you see what I mean. I think that's what bothers me about it. I think opening up the thinking is great, but then to narrow it down to something specific that's measurable is the danger. That's my thinking.
Yeah.
I think go on, Maggie.
Well, just to say, there's always, I think, and I strongly believe from everything I've seen, there's always been a massively strong collaborative gene across, I know the English education system better, it's the same in Wales and Scotland, but in the English education system, massive, generations. And as you say, Sarah, the pandemic has really enlivened that once again. So how do we help that to thrive and flourish and generate even better outcomes for children across a local area, without it becoming overly systematized and overstructured by government? So we've got, as Michael Fullen talks about, this really powerful sort of middle tier, which is also quite organic, infused with trust, so we don't need to have a regulatory system in order to reach out to our neighbour. We do that. So how do we keep that balance between some sort of regulation so no one's missing out, but not so much regulation that collaboration becomes something else that can be overly defined from maybe one particular perspective, and the richness of it and the common humanity of it that's driven it through the pandemic is lost once again.
I think it's interesting because I serve as the independent chair of the Blackpool Education Improvement Board, and in effect that is a mechanism whereby all the CEOs, all the head teachers, all feed into that body. So and actually I think, I'm not saying I do that job particularly well, but one thing I do know that they like is the fact that I'm not employed by the council and I'm not employed by the trusts, in that actually I act as a sort of fair broker on all of this. And actually I think that the sort of knocking of heads together, which occurred in Blackpool probably 4 or 5 years before I took on the role, meant that the sort of the pandemic came at just the right time to test those relationships. So this is quite a mature relationship that these individual trusts have with each other. And it's all done on the basis that, well, these are Blackpool children, aren't they? And we all have a duty to serve that community. I think the pandemic had the benefit of reducing accountability league tables. The league tables disappeared, Ofsted disappeared. And actually that encouraged collaboration and people willing to focus on slightly different things. So I think getting back to where we're heading, I think the points that Sarah were making there, we need to have a system that actually does acknowledge that things have changed over the last couple of years. And I do think we do need to challenge some trusts as to whether or not they are sufficiently community-minded. Their community, the community that they're meant to be serving, not the community that they choose to serve, whether that's because they select children or whatever mechanism's being used. But actually, we need to ensure that they're serving the community in which they're based. So, I think this is around opportunity, isn't it, to influence that going forward. Yeah.
But I do also think it's very much about values, isn't it? And how do you measure values? It's very difficult to measure values. We all know what they look like when they are enacted, but it's quite difficult to have a physical measurement of those sorts of things. And, collaboration is about relationships, ultimately, isn't it? It's about trust. It's about reciprocity. It's about those sorts of behaviours and values, and it's very difficult to measure those. So I completely agree that it's let's not narrow things down so that it becomes a measurement that somebody can tick off and say yes, that's been done. Because again, that would just stifle I don't know, it's that goodwill. I mean, we used to talk a lot, didn't we, at the college, Maggie, about moral compass and moral purpose. of leadership, and never has that been more important, and never has that been seen more obviously than the last couple of years or so. And so let's not try and measure that, because that just is, and it always will be in the system.
It's like trying to measure my relationship with my wife, which I've been married to for 42 years. I mean, the thing is, the fact that we are still together, we are still engaging, we're still doing stuff, we're managing problems within the family and whatever, but we're still doing that. For me, that's the measurement.
Yes,
that's the measurement. I don't want anybody to come and tell me, "Hey, you've got an outstanding marriage there, Frank." That would kill it stone dead. So actually, what we need to do is just build on this sort of willingness to work together, for the benefit of everybody, not just the benefit of the academy.
Yeah, that's a great analogy there, Frank. In fact, John West-Burnham used to talk about how he and his wife, because John loved his flip charts. They had the flip chart, one at either end of the room. That's how they used to communicate with each other. It's probably totally apocryphal, but it always used to raise a laugh. This whole, because we also know of lots of areas that collaborate, lots of schools that collaborate, and nothing changes. It's a waste of energy. It's not purposeful. And I know in Essex County Council, the education service there, they've worked really hard over the last few years to build a network-based system. Some academies, lots of local authority schools, different schools, they used to worry a bit, and the schools used to worry a bit about this messiness of multi-belonging. And now they've said, look, let's just get over it, because it's just how the system is. We don't have to let that be a barrier. And they now talk a lot about collaboration as being an accelerator of what any one individual school or trust can achieve alone. And if it's not an accelerator, or indeed a sort of going deeper for specific children or parts of the community where things feel quite stuck, then what's the purpose of it? And I think in that sense, Sarah, there may be ways of looking at how we measure acceleration. And I'm not talking here about necessarily the targets that we all know about. Yes, they're important, but the accelerators in other ways. And I do think that's something that can start to define really exceptional collaboration.
I think it's interesting, because we're going to have to come to a close in a minute, but I think it's interesting the point that you were making there, Maggie, about what Essex are doing. Actually, I think that for me, the sort of difference is that there are in Blackpool, for example, where you've got local authority schools, you've got church trusts, you've got a whole mixture of them, but that acts as a check and balance when we all come together. In that, actually, I think there are some dangers if actually it becomes quite plural. So actually, I think having this sort of broad range of participants, all of them with different sort of approaches, but actually still serving the one community, does mean that actually you're probably representing, you've got more voices representing that community than if it was just one or two voices. So I think there's some real value, I think, in looking at that community-based approach and the collaboration that goes with it, that you have to engage with it and become part of that community. I think it's great that this is something Michael's been pushing for. Well, that's when I spoke at the annual conference in 2019. I think he was ahead of the curve on that, and I think he's pushed that ever since, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, do you know what? That's 35 minutes. We were going to have a little slot about have you read a book that you want to share? I think we might have time for that. I won't go to Sarah for this to start with. I think I might go to Maggie. So Maggie, is there a book that you've been reading recently that you think sort of influenced or affected your thinking?
Well, one there's a phrase in one book that's really resonated with me, and I mentioned earlier the work I'm doing on the inner life of leaders around the practice of compassion, kindness, mindfulness, leadership presence, to coin a term, and how leaders can work with their attention, which is their biggest resource and work with it wisely so they can show up wisely to the world. And there's a book I came across by Deborah Tull called Relational Mindfulness. So I took a look at it, and there was one phrase in it that really stopped me in my tracks in terms of, as leaders, how attentive are we to what's going on within ourselves and out in our outer world, and how we can spend a lot of time when we get over busy in a state of partial attentiveness. And in this book, Deborah says, attentiveness is a subtle act of love to self and to others. Inattentiveness, where we spend much of our time, is a subtle act of neglect to self and others. And when we get over busy, we become inattentive because our minds are scattered and our attention is not clear. So that really, really struck me. So that
I think we're going to stop on that, Sarah, because that's a real, that really, I mean, in a way it's gone full circle, isn't it, this conversation, because that's where I think you started, Maggie, in terms of how you're introducing yourself. But Sarah, are there any, apart from the symposium, are there any other sort of major events happening over the next 4 weeks or so for Forum Strategy, or is it just heading towards the symposium?
That you've put me on the spot a little bit there, Frank.
Apart from the day-to-day stuff.
I should have.
Well, let's just say there, Sarah, that we're all heading towards the symposium, which is in early June. So if you haven't put your name down for that yet, please do. And
yes, definitely. And as with anything else, please look on our website or on our Twitter feed for all other events, because we obviously do regularly flag those. So yes, direct people to the Twitter page and our web page as well.
Fabulous. And Maggie, thank you so much for joining us. I think you've brought a different slant to the discussion that Sarah and I have. So thank you so much for that. And I hope Forum Strategy members who are listening to this will agree that, Maggie, you've been a major asset to our podcast. So thank you for joining us.
Definitely. And thank you very much from me as well, Maggie. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the two of you. It's a delight to see you again. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and lots of threads there in my mind to think about further. So I'm sure Forum Strategy over the year will be guiding us through these sort of really, really important, deep reflections about what really matters. So yeah, thank you for inviting me as a guest.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. And so until next month, bye-bye.